Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our second in the series of Yalla Count Me In. Nope, I keep saying that. It's now Yalla Count MENA In webinar series. Very excited to be hosting this conversation. And now that we have the newly released race and ethnicity standards, I'm delighted to be having this conversation with the group of folks assembled here today. Officially, the census experts, unofficially, data equity warriors who have literally been working fiercely on these issues for a long time. And I'm thrilled to be able to have them with us for this conversation today. I want to go ahead and just say that we're referring to the Office of Management and Budget's brand new released last month, effective as of March 28th, 2024, the new race and ethnicity standards, which have an impact on everybody. But for us as Arab Americans, this is an incredibly important and historic milestone in that we've now gone from the 6 existing categories to a 7th minimum reporting category with the MENA checkbox, Middle East, North Africa. Incredibly important. And we thought we'd convene our conversation today specifically to talk about how it impacts all of our communities and then some very specific areas in which we believe, as wonderful as this development is, we can do better. So with that, I want to start by first going to my colleague, Meeta, from the Leadership Conference for Civil and Human Rights, where she is the Senior Director for Census and Data Equity. Previously, she served as the New York Immigration Coalition Census 2020 Senior Fellow, where she spearheaded the organization's efforts to ensure a fair and accurate count of New Yorkers, particularly immigrants, in the 2020 census. Meeta, let me turn it over to you to kind of do some context setting.
Thank you so very much, Maya, and thank you for that introduction. And I think that introduction, I always sort of smile when I hear it because it refers to the Get Out the Count efforts of 2020. And I think in this context, it's actually particularly apt. And I will say why a bit more in a minute. So what we heard on March 28th, 2024 from the OMB is that they are revising the federal standards for the collection, maintenance, and tabulation of race and ethnicity data for federal statistical agencies. This is applicable to all federal surveys, and I say that for a reason. The headlines talk about the census. We came into this work, all of us, from the census, but this affects way more than the census. It affects what we think of as the decennial census, so the 2020 census, the 2030 census, but it also affects the American Community Survey, where we get more detailed data on our communities. It affects any survey that the federal government is conducting, but it affects states who might want to update their standards to meet the federal government, and it affects nonprofits or for-profit groups, that private sector groups that are really looking to what does the government say, thinking that the government looked at this long and hard and came up with what categories we should be saying. So I say that just to give it that context. So what happened with this? Well, historically, and we'll use the census form because that's what everyone thinks of. There was a question at the top that said, are you of Hispanic or Latino origin, yes or no? And then there was the next question, which is, what race are you? Check all that apply. And there we had white, Black, Asian, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, American Indian, Alaska Native, and I think I did it all right. And then we had some other race, which is specific to the Census Bureau. What we saw that the OMB announced in March is that it's going to be one long question. So it's going to say, what race and or ethnicity are you? So Hispanic or Latino gets added into that long list of categories, and Middle East, North African gets added in as a new category within it. So this is very exciting, and this shows it right here. It is one long list. People can check whatever applies to them, be it a race, be it an ethnicity, be it both, be it 2 ethnicity, be it 2 races. The permutations are endless. Also exciting here is these detailed checkboxes. Now, I know we're going to talk about them a lot because there are some concerns with them, but let's take, for example, the Asian category. If you think about it, China has over 1 billion people, India has over 1 billion people, and they were both under the Asian category. And now someone from China or India can check Asian and then check Chinese or check Asian Indian. So this really allows people to feel like they are more fully reflecting themselves. It allows for better and more accurate data. Why does it matter? And how did we know this was a problem? Well, I think Roz will be talking about this, but we saw an increase in numbers of people who were selecting some other race. We saw that for the Hispanic Latino community. I know the MENA community also had a proclivity to checking that box as well. And why does that matter? Well, because only the Census Bureau collects some other race. So when we're doing analyses, these were people that had to be reassigned. Someone else was deciding for them what their race was, and it wasn't reflecting what they were putting on the boxes. So what does this mean? Well, I'll go back to my census beginning. When we were doing Get Out the Count activities, for the census, there were people that did not feel like they were reflected in the form. So this makes those conversations easier. People can look at the forms and feel like they are able to tell the story of themselves. We will hear today that that's not necessarily true of everyone, but we feel that on the whole, it is true of more people, thereby allowing us to get better and more accurate data to use for classic census things like redistricting and apportionment, but also for enforcing civil rights laws, for targeting programmatic activities, for analyzing disparities, and for enforcing equal opportunity. And for me, I think what I hearken back to one of the things I said at the beginning. These data tell the story of who we are. And so for people to be able to say for themselves who they are and who we are as a nation allows for that better telling of us as a nation, and for us to be able to examine disparities, examine root causes, and then better to be able to better target policy decisions, and really seek better outcomes. Now that the more accurate data will hopefully allow us to more accurately identify disparities.
Thank you so much for that, Meeta, always grounding it in the way the conversation needs to be had. As I mentioned, important development with regards to a new category. The standards also, as Meeta has explained, provided us with a new combined race and ethnicity question and a more detailed requirement for detailed collection of data. Now, that's all the good stuff, right? That's the important stuff in terms of the developments here that we're pleased with. But part of what I mentioned in terms of needing to make sure we get it right is about making sure that with regards to the MENA category, that it is accurately reflects the full racial and geographical diversity of communities that fall within the MENA populations. For Arab Americans, that's incredibly important. And part of that conversation also involves making sure that we accurately count the Black diaspora here in the US. So folks who would identify racially as Black and perhaps ethnically as Arab, and the importance of having Afro-Arabs being able to check a box, multiple boxes that they identify with is critical of that. And it's not clear from, well, the existing standards would allow for that. So I want to now go to one of our important partners in this, Iheoma. Thank you so much for being with us here today. Iheoma is a special advisor for the census for the National Urban League. She's also a research professor at the Department of Public Policy at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And importantly, she serves on the U.S. Census Bureau's National Advisory Committee. Iheoma, thanks so much for joining us. If you could offer comments both on the combined race and ethnicity question, as well as your concerns regarding Black diaspora.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Maya, for inviting me, and just appreciate this conversation happening, and because I think it is an exciting time. And so we want to make sure we recognize that exciting time. And again, thanks everybody for being here. And so, again, I'm from the National Urban League, where I serve as a special advisor. And I just want to sort of underscore the National Urban League, along with the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation, convenes what we call the Black Census Roundtable, which is has about 30 or so national civil rights organizations. And again, these organizations have long supported an accurate count of diverse racial ethnic groups in the US, really for the purpose, as Meeta already said, for like congressional representation or civil rights enforcement and federal fund allocation, et cetera. And so really, we really applaud OMB's effort to really recognize the growing diversity of our nation and improve the data accuracy for, I will say, for some populations, since it has been almost 30 years since that the race and ethnicity standards were updated. And of course, you know, as you already alluded to, Maya, we are, however, concerned about the potential erasure of the Black diaspora community. And I'll just highlight a couple of sort of areas because, you know, I only have a short window and obviously want to hear from many others. Right, the first I would just say first and foremost is probably the continued confound between race and ethnicity, right? And again, what I mean by that is that we recognize that some groups may not understand the nuance between race and ethnicity. It's kind of the same sort of bubble. But without clarity about the terms, it could actually have an outsized impact, such as on redistricting. And with the confounding of these two terms, you know, some people may assume MENA is a race. And as you just articulated, you know, really well, right, that we know that MENA as the Middle East and North African category, right, it has racial and transnational and other kinds of sort of a diversity that we want to make sure is fully represented. And so to sort of begin to sort of say MENA is a race could really cause more harm than necessary. And we argue similarly for sort of the Hispanic ethnic category as well. And so the question may become, you know, how does the census tabulate this combined question in a way that really recognizes the race and ethnicity are two distinct constructs? They're related, but again, two distinct constructs. And then really specific to the MENA ethnic category, right, there's not even, as you already noted, a signal and or indication that the African diaspora people can see themselves. Again, I will say that the census do note, right, that for example, you know, Sudanese people always check Black, even though they have a MENA option, at least in their testing. But again, I will still, you know, so I can't really argue whether or not they should be included per se. But I do think it's important that what the lack of even Black representation in the MENA category, for example, may just be a marker that shows that, you know, the Black diaspora community in like Afro-Arabs may not be important, right? That signals something to particular communities. And so we have to really think about this, especially we're trying to identify potential disparities, right, based on race or ethnic groups. And so the lack of attention to gathering data, say on Afro-Arabs, can really undermine the importance of ensuring appropriate political representation and power, funding, civil rights enforcement, et cetera. So we have to really, you know, make sure that we're clear about who is a particular, who's under what particular racial group or under what particular ethnic groups. And also just want to flag, right, we want to ensure that we are clear about the coding, right? So again, as we sort of, I mean, I don't want to go too much into the weeds, but we want to make sure that especially now you just don't have just the check box, you also have to write it, right? So say if somebody checks out, say Black African American, it writes Arab, right, or North African, right? How will that be coded? Will this be under some other race or called SOAR? Or would this be Black in MENA? So again, we want to really make sure that as we applaud OMB for moving in this direction, we want to also be clear about what are the implications of how all this will be treated when it comes down to sort of coding, tabulation, et cetera. So really, in sum, right, we want to improve where and how our Caribbeans, Afro-Latinos, Afro-Arabs, and other Black immigrants are either seen or counted in the categories and descriptions. And we really, most importantly, do not want to conflate race and ethnicity. Again, given that some of those ethnic groups, right, MENA, Latino, right, have a diversity of racial groups that are a part of them. So using those terms interchangeably as if they had the same meaning could really undermine really trying to make sure that we're able to fully and accurately count people, but also make sure we don't ignore the disparities that we know exist within ethnic groups as well. So this requires OMB to listen to the unique concerns of diverse Black populations, including Afro-Arabs, and I actually implore members of the MENA community to really ensure that there is no Black erasure, as it will likely have consequences now and into the future. And so there's a need for OMB and other federal agencies to have more community engagement and further research and testing. But it's also important for MENA community to be part of making the invisible visible. And again, I just thank you, Maya, and AI for really creating this space. And of course, I'm going to leave you all in a little bit but I just want to make sure that we really don't sort of continue the erasure of Black people within any of both the ethnic groups, but even also the other racial groups. So thank you for providing this platform to hear us talk about this.
Thank you, Iheoma, for that and all your work, and we couldn't agree more. I will say that we've got Iheoma for a limited amount of time, but for those, and she's going to stay with us as long as she can, but for others that are on the webinar, please submit your questions for our panelists through the Q&A function. We're going to make sure that we will answer those. You know, both Meeta and Iheoma have talked about this. One of the unusual things that happened with regards to the race and ethnicity standards announcement was that the OMB actually prescribed specifically the categories that appear within the question. So typically you would have the race and ethnicity standards are out, here's the new minimum reporting categories, and we would all be like, this is incredibly wonderful, and we move forward and we work with our colleagues at the Census Bureau with regards to research and testing and make sure that we get the question frame correct, the wording correct, and as Iheoma has referenced, the signaling examples, incredibly important for people. I like to refer to them as normal people who don't spend their time looking at these issues the way that we do. Where do I see myself in the question as it's being presented? And one of the key elements that I think we've talked about is the fact that the subpopulations given within the examples and the write-ins do not accurately reflect the geographical diversity and the racial diversity of those categories. And that certainly applies to MENA with regards to the reference to, we can talk about Sudanese or Somalis or others. And for example, Dominicans not appearing as a signaling example under the Latino, Hispanic Latino. So with that, I want to now take us to our next colleague, Roz, who's here with us. She is the Chief Public Officer with NALEO Education Fund. She has worked for more than 3 decades on policy analysis, research, naturalization, Latino civic engagement efforts, extensive policy expertise in the areas of newcomer civic integration, election reform, voting rights, and of course, the census. So with that, let me turn it over to you, Roz, to talk to us about that piece of it.
Great. Well, first of all, I want to express my sincere and heartfelt thanks to Maya and the Arab American Institute for inviting us to be part of this conversation. And I want to do a shout out to the Yalla, Count MENA In campaign. Love the title and love the energy within it. So thank you all so much. So I would like to talk about why the approach that has been adopted in the OMB standards, the combined question approach, provides a very critical opportunity to collect more complete and accurate data about Latinos, but also talk about and address some of the challenges that we have and the work we still have to do moving forward. So if we can bring the question up, that would be great. So as Meeta had mentioned, before the revised standards were adopted, people were asked about whether or not they were Latino in a separate question, and then they were given a list of racial categories to indicate which race we have known from both working with the Latino community and also from research that when many Latinos who would look at the racial categories would not see themselves in those categories. And when they didn't see themselves, they would either leave the race question blank or indicate they were of some other race. Which means we were really not having Latinos completely filling out the census form. I think in Census 2020, about 40% or so of Latinos either left the race question blank or indicated some other race. And again, as Meeta had mentioned, because there's a need to make data from the census comparable with other OMB data, or other data governed by OMB standards, many other federal data sets don't have a some other race category. So for comparability, Latinos who indicated some other race would be, or left the question completely blank, would be assigned to a category that they did not necessarily identify with. And for the most part, Latinos were assigned white racial identification. So for much of the data about the racial composition of the population, you have a distorted view of how white the nation is. And interestingly, because of the way the Census Bureau reports on these data, you also had some other race alone or in combination being the second largest racial group in the nation for Census 2020. So, how does the combined question get at those concerns? Well, first of all, as you can see, you can check off Hispanic or Latino, but you also have the option to check off all that apply. So you can indicate that you're Latino, but also indicate that you're identify with one of the racial groups. You have Latino identity ethnically, and you have a racial identity that you may wish to indicate, or for some Latinos, they see their Hispanic or Latino identity as their sole identity. So that may be the sole box they check off, but having that option is going to be very important to make sure that Latinos answer these questions. Secondly, and this was something that's very important about the check boxes. If you look at the check boxes under Hispanic or Latino, under the separate question approach, if you identified with more than one subgroup, like let's say you were Mexican and Guatemalan, or you're Dominican or Puerto Rican, you had to choose one of those boxes and only one, or you had to only write in one identity. The great opportunity that the combined question provides is an ability to say, hey, I can completely fill in my Latino national origin subgroup identity. I can indicate I'm Mexican and I'm Guatemalan, or I'm Dominican and Salvadoran. So that's what I call the good news. The challenge that we still face ahead is something that many of our other speakers have mentioned, which is that if you look under the Black or African American category, both the check boxes in the example, and you look at the Hispanic or Latino category, both again, the check boxes or examples, there's not clear signaling for Afro-Latinos if they identify as both Black and Latino to check both boxes off. In particular, under the Black or African American subgroups and examples, there's nothing there that would indicate that, hey, again, if that's how you identify, you should both check off Black and Hispanic or Latino. Now, one of the little bright lights or things that we found encouraging about when the standards were released is that OMB recognized that this is an area that needs more research. And they also recognize this for the MENA category as well. So the OMB is going to be doing more research on how to get complete and better data on Afro-Latinos, and they've made this a research priority. And one thing we think is just critical, which is that when they do this research, they need to have Afro-Latino researchers at the table, okay? They need to have, and same with Afro-MENA and MENA researchers, they all have to be at the table when this research is done. This can't be done without close consultation with people who have expertise and familiarity with those groups. You've heard some of the other issues that we're thinking about as we move forward. Things like, how do you code the data? How do you make sure people can easily and accessibly get data that show people who are both indicate both a racial and an ethnic identity? Comparability is a big deal for the Latino community because how do you make sure data collected under the two separate question approach is comparable to data collected with a combined question approach? And then finally, I just want to say that Census 2030 is only 6 years away. And we need to make sure that as the Bureau plans and thinks about how it's going to do outreach and engagement and how you all think about how you're going to do outreach and engagement, that you take into account that we have a new question, For the Latino community, we already know there's 3 or 4 basic messages we have to get across. One is there's a new question. 2, check all that apply is a very important message. 3, fill in your write-in boxes, right? But what are the best messages and messengers to get that message across? So we still have work to do, and we're very much looking forward to working with Maya and working with the Arab American Institute and our other colleagues to make sure, as Maya says, we get it right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roz. Another group that we value deeply and don't talk about enough are Arab-Tinos, and they are a sizable number, including some folks who've been integral in the work that we do at the civic engagement piece at the Institute. So that is also incredibly important. So as we've talked about this, we tried to kind of divide it up into different buckets. The final bucket we want to raise is comes in with regards to the call for more detailed data collection and the requirement for more detailed data collection, specifically data disaggregation, is absolutely critical. So with that, I want to go to Terry next. Terry is the Vice President of the Census and Voting Programs for Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC. Terry's experience on the census spans 2 decades, having served as a leading authority on census campaigns in 2010 and 2020. She's also currently the co-chair of the Leadership Conference Census Task Force. Terry, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Maya. And thank you to my co-panelists that you make it really easy for me just to add my additional thoughts to all the excellent information that's been shared so far. So I think coming into this effort to revise the standards, what we knew and what we had seen was that very few agencies voluntarily disaggregated their data, even when such activity was both allowable and encouraged under the previous standards. So for us, this new requirement for detailed data collection is a important step forward and a major win for the Asian American community. Detailed data are particularly critical for Asian Americans who are among our nation's fastest growing and most diverse racial groups. Often viewed as homogenous, our communities include more than 30 detailed subgroups that can differ dramatically across key social and economic indicators. For example, in the context of health disparities, US-born Vietnamese American women are 4 times more likely to die of breast cancer than any other Asian American group. And Korean American children are 4 times more likely to have no health insurance as compared to others. Data disaggregation, therefore, is critical because it allows for us to see these differences and allows for us to be able to address the needs of different communities, right? Because when data are not disaggregated, broad trends for, say, the entire group can mask much more nuanced or harmful outcomes for specific subgroups, leaving their needs and issues invisible and unmet. So I think what's really important for us to remember with the new revised standards is that it provides opportunities for the public to engage and make sure the communities are represented, which is very important, as we've been hearing in this discussion today, that there's still a lot more work that needs to happen, right? We're thinking about implementation. How is this actually going to play out? And so this is particularly important in the context of the requirement for detailed data disaggregation, so that we can make sure that we are allowing communities to see themselves and be able to properly self-identify. So I just wanted to go through a couple of quick ways that I believe that these standards go, towards allowing us to actually achieve or maximize the promise of what we're seeing in that opportunity to have data disaggregation as a requirement of federal agencies. So the first thing I wanted to note was that OMB committed in their Federal Register notice to establishing an interagency committee on race and ethnicity statistical standards. This will be convened by the Chief Statistician of the United States, and that committee will be maintained, and it will carry out a government-wide research agenda and will undertake regular reviews of the standards, which will take place at a minimum on a 10-year cycle, and explicitly includes an opportunity for public input. And OMB can also decide at any time to initiate a review of the standards. This is important because it's a commitment from the federal government to keep this issue at the forefront moving forward, rather than having this be sort of a one-time review, a one-time event that happens and then won't evolve with the times, won't evolve with how our communities understand self-identity. So I think that is a really important component of what the revised standards do and allow for us to continue to move this forward. Secondly, the revised standards set an 18-month deadline for agencies to publish an action plan on race and ethnicity data that outlines how they will comply with these standards within 5 years, right? So the standard sets a 5-year mark as at which point all agencies should be in compliance. Agencies also must make these plans available to the public through their websites. And this to me really provides an opportunity for us to engage with the agencies we're interested in to ensure that their plans on compliance are done in a way that best reflects our communities. And this means that we can really take advantage of the final opportunity because OMB recognized the need to balance the need for consistency with the ability to adapt to change and meet specific program needs. The standards allow for agencies to submit a request to OMB's Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs for an exemption if that agency determines that the potential benefit of the detailed data would not justify the additional burden to the agency and the public, or the additional risk to privacy or confidentiality. It also offers an opportunity for agencies to apply for a variance to the detailed categories that are listed in the standards if they determine that collecting different detailed data categories would be more useful or accurate for their specific context and intended uses. Now, OIRA, the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, will review these requests and will only approve them if they contain sufficient justification. And because this will be done through the Paperwork Reduction Act, that process in most cases will include at least a 3-month opportunity for public comment, right? And so these are all ways that we can engage to try to make sure that whatever is being requested is one that is reasonable and doesn't harm our communities at a minimum, and hopefully would actually be more beneficial to our communities. So I would say that these opportunities really allow for us to engage in the present and the future around data collection and reporting about our communities. And really, these revised standards are a monumental step forward in our ability and our communities, including our smaller subgroups, to be seen and to have our needs addressed.
Thank you so much for that, Terry. And I know that we're going to come back to you on the issue of remedies that we can take that are contained within the standards. Before we turn it over to Q&A, I just wanted to provide a tiny bit of context on the MENA category piece that we're sort of, incredibly excited about. So I want to be clear on that, right? Like, we've gotten to the point here. The initial request that the Insitute made was in 1995, 29 years ago, in the lead up to the last time the standards were revised in 1997. And it is a historical moment for us in that having the minimum reporting category allows for the checkbox, so folks can, instead of when Roz and Meeta were both talking about the some other race category, some folks found themselves there for sure. As a matter of our Get Out the Count campaign in 2020, we actually instructed folks to check off some other race because we had no category. And therefore, we would say, check off some other race and then write in your ethnicity or national origin. And that's how we would hope to collect that data. So to be able to get to a place where the category will appear on all federal forms, as is clear, and the 2030 decennial is incredibly critical. The reason that we are having the conversation about what else needs to be done is directly related to a couple of issues specifically. So first, with regards to MENA broadly, It is, as I've said, both racially diverse, geographically diverse, and that includes transnational communities that are here in the US from the MENA region. One of the largest is Armenian Americans, who are at least 500,000. So the count of 500,000 for Armenians is without a category in place, without actually doing the work that needs to be done to count them accurately. And we still have at least 500,000. So for us, we would want to make sure that a MENA category it allows folks to identify the way that they want to, and that includes transnational communities like Chaldeans and Assyrians and Armenians as well, and Kurds. So that's a big piece of it. The second part, as I've mentioned already, relates to the racial diversity within both MENA and the Arab American community, which is why from day one, the emphasis has been on creating MENA as an ethnic category, so that depending on how one identifies racially, they would check off a racial category and then also be able to check off MENA as an ethnicity like Hispanic and Latino. So that part has been really critical to our engagement with the Census Bureau. And it should be clear that the Bureau has been a key partner in this effort. Dating back, we didn't get it in 1997 in terms of those standards, but it was very clear after 2010 that the Bureau took up the issue of the undercount and the combined question, and just really did a lot of testing to get to a place of understanding more deeply what these issues are and how we can adjust and remedy them. And that is how really we got to the national content test in 2015. It's how we got to the recommendation for a combined question and the addition of a MENA category. So the Bureau has been a real important and central partner in this process. And that is why, as we look at the way that the standards were issued, again, referring specifically to the fact that the subpopulation checkboxes and write-ins were prescribed, that it's important that we conduct the kind of research and testing that Terry has mentioned. It's sort of critical to get it right, both in terms of the Afro-Latino population, which is sizable in terms of its number, and the importance of being able to have them identify as they need to, as they want to. We would, of course, given that MENA is a brand new category, one would have to do the same with considerable more research and testing to make sure that the question is asked correctly and the categories that appear there are the ones that need to. So with that, I can now begin our question and answer period. So folks, feel free to chime in there with questions. Let me start with the first from Rhonda Kayali, who literally could be one of the panelists on today's discussion. Thanks for joining us, Rhonda. Why is Arab not listed as a checkbox, a significant omission? So Rhonda, I agree with you. What our concern with regards to the checkboxes is, do they adequately signal to respondents which categories they may fit in? Regrettably, Arab does not appear there, even though when you look at the numbers, those who checked off Arab are roughly 240,000. The Bureau said that they made their choices with regards to which checkboxes appeared based on population size, but that's not necessarily consistent with what actually appears under MENA. So that is a good question, Rhonda, and one that we have to follow up with to kind of get a better understanding of how these checkboxes need to appear to make sure that they are doing the right thing in terms of signaling. Where is the Palestinian box from Camilla? Agreed. The Palestinian numbers are actually smaller. They're about roughly 160,000. And part of the reason for that is that we believe a lot of Palestinians actually identify within the category as Arab, so that they write down Arab, and we think the Arab aggregate number has a lot of the Palestinian population is there. But again, a very good question, and one that has to be researched and tested in order to make sure that we get to a better place on this. Another question, will the forms be given in different languages? If people were to fill out the form in different languages, will it be recognized? Colleagues, who wants to take that one?
So I'm happy to jump in. Yes, it will be given in different languages. I can answer the first half. Which languages those will be, it's not clear yet. That decision will be made closer to the census, the census 2030. In the past, it's been Spanish, it's been a number of Asian languages. I believe it may have also been a number of European languages. They are minimal. I want to say maybe 5, 6 other languages other than English in the previous several censuses. And they also have, so that's the first part. And I believe, although Roz, you may know better, my expectation is if people responded in language, it should be accepted, but don't quote me on that for sure. I think that's the one question I have about with respect to if people respond in language, how does that work?
Right.
Now, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say the other thing we also want to advocate for is that the Census Bureau has assistance hotlines you can call. And we want to make sure that people who are staffing those hotlines have a large range of language proficiency, and then also that there's culturally competent and linguistically competent people working for the Bureau in partnership with organizations doing the outreach. But I think Terry is right about us having to wait to see which languages the forms will be in, and also confirm that indeed, if you fill it out in another language, that they will have the ability to translate and understand what you've said.
Thank you, Terry and Roz on that. A question from Lynn. Does the Statistical Policy Directive 15 documentation include guidance on tabulation?
I will start that one since I misspoke earlier when I wanted to say on presentation of data and I used the word tabulation. And so the answer is actually, it actually does not, beyond a certain level. Like it does say, here are options, you can present it as you are allowed, and I think this presages another question that's in the chat, well, you are allowed to have a category that's mixed race, which is one of 2 or more races, but you are also allowed to do cross tabulations. My apologies for sounding wonky. Like you can do as many permutations as you want, but you are also allowed to conflate it. But they are not at this point giving guidance as to exactly what that looks like beyond just like you are allowed to do 2 or more races as a category. Roz, you were nodding. Did I?
Yes. I just wanted to add that this is another opportunity, as we would say, for further input and advocacy. As I had mentioned with Latinos, we are now going to start to see a possible categorization of Latino alone, or in combination. And then, how many other groups is Latino alone or in combination? How granular data can we get? How is that going to be usefully tabulated? How do we make sure that if you start to get Latino alone in combination, you aren't, in a sense, diluting some of the differences? And again, I think that this is another area of where we have work to do. And I would suspect, again, some of these issues are same for whether how the MENA category is tabulated and reported alone or in combination with other racial and ethnic groups.
And Maya, if I can jump back in, because there is a question later on that like references how like if you are of 2 races, but it's because each of your parents are of a different race versus like you are sort of 2 races from generations back where it's like more mixed, like is that reflected in the data? And it isn't like that type of granularity. If someone indicates that they are of Caribbean origin and Asian Indian origin, that could have been something that happened as a first generation, or it could be something that happened in Guyana like 4 generations ago. And that type of granularity is not something that I think we're able to tease out yet with these types of questions. And I do think it's something long-term we need to consider as we are an increasingly diversifying nation where we see these types of combinations more and more.
And then the only thing I wanted to add to this excellent comment is just the reminder that is in part why they are standing up this interagency committee to continue looking at these issues. I think some of the meetings we've been in, there was an acknowledgement that after the 97 revisions, they sort of just dropped it off in people's laps and said, okay, have at it, good luck. And so there is an acknowledgement that, okay, we need to be, you know, that there's more to the work than just coming up with the standards, that there's concerns about tabulation, bridging. How do you bridge from the current standards to the previous standards, where, you know, and how do we make sure that the data comparisons that we're doing are really apple to apples, and can help us achieve all the things that Meeta started us out with, right? And making sure that we're able to meet those needs.
And honestly, the space in the weeds here is exactly where we need to be on this conversation, because that is where so much of this will directly impact how much we're able to improve the count. And I'm so grateful for my colleagues' comments on all this. Another question, can you comment on Israel being a subcategory of MENA? So understandably, that this issue is going to come up in terms of the subpopulations that appear there. So let me frame it this way. MENA, as we define it, as we've asked the Census Bureau to define it, is Middle East and North Africa, and it includes the 22 members of the Arab League, as well as Israel, Iran, and Turkey, as well as the transnational groups that are here in the US that come from the MENA region. So that is our definition of MENA, and it is one that we hope is as inclusive as it needs to be, which is why we continue to work with our colleagues at the Bureau to make sure that we get that right. I will say that the importance of the subcategories appearing there both as checkboxes and write-in examples, again, is to signal to a respondent. So when the Census Bureau conducted its national content test in 2015, they specifically noted that they needed to do additional research on potentially including Israelis and Kurds as an example, the write-in example, for the purpose of signaling to those populations that they belong in that category. So we think that makes sense, and it's important to conduct that kind of testing to make sure that respondents are able to see themselves in the category. The part we had more difficulty with is understanding why the categories were prescribed within the standards themselves before the additional testing and research that is required to get it right was there. And second question regards to an Arab category, yes, if in my perfect world, the category would be that. But I will tell you that those efforts from the late 80s to early 90s were focused on Arab Middle East or Arab American. And it became clear back then that it's important that the category is more inclusive so that it's able to count folks. Remember, we're talking about real estate on forms. So what was the larger checkbox that could be there? And then within that you can then check it and identify by either checking the subcategory box or writing in. So from our perspective, the MENA category gets the checkbox, and then the importance of the disaggregate data that Terry was talking about arrives at making sure that you either check the category that applies to you or you write in your ethnicity or national origin, because that part is critical. If we, for example, for the Arab American Institute, if we got aggregate MENA category, that doesn't work for us. That we would need specifically to be able to capture the Arab American numbers. Otherwise, it sort of lands us at the same place of being rendered invisible in the data and not particularly helpful. Let's go to another question. I worked on the census disinfo in 2020. How do you think bad actors will try to manipulate the new category to cause discord? What do we need to be watching for? An excellent question. Who wants to start on that one?
Well, I'll jump in just real quickly. So right now, one of our biggest concerns, before we get to the concerns about misinformation and disinformation, is that there are a lot of opponents to this level of good data on the racial and ethnic identification of the American population. And many of these opponents sort of feel that, gee, this is divisive. It makes people too much having to identify with their own race or ethnicity, and somehow some of this is like a very superficial hiding of the fact that they are not comfortable with how diverse our society is being. So there's going to be people who are you're going to be hearing people sort of talk about their opposition to this. But as we think about information and disinformation, One of our concerns is that there will just be sort of an effort to create chaos around this. Oh, this is confusing, as well as to tie it into efforts. One of the threats to that we're seeing to a fair and accurate census is efforts to ask about citizenship status, and efforts to only count citizens in the apportionment base for apportionment purposes. And if you start to have all of this conflated, right, the new categories, the fact that many people don't want citizens to be counted, or want to ask people about their citizenship identity, and with, again, the rise of anti-immigrant sentiment, if all of these start to get conflated, we are going to have people who are just going to be fearful about filling out the forms. So we're going to have to really make sure that efforts to get people to fill out the forms and get counted and stand up for their identities have to, one, emphasize the confidentiality of information provided to the government, and two, just really help people understand that there's a new question and what their options are.
Thank you for that, Roz. Terry, I'm going to ask you to answer this one. Will Arab Americans be able to get to the kind of healthcare detail Terry is mentioning with regards to Vietnamese women, for example? Will we be able to see health differences with persons of Yemeni descent versus Algerian descent? If I can have both Terry and Meeta comment on the importance of the disaggregate data with regards to healthcare and health research, health disparities.
Sure. I mean, certainly that is our hope that will be achievable, right, in the not too distant future. I think it's going to be important. That's one of the main reasons it's so important to make sure that we get these categories right, that we make sure that the categories are consistent across different agencies, across different data sets, that will allow for certain types of data analysis to occur. If everybody has different groups that they're using, then that might not be something that is feasible. But I think that it is, I guess you can say, one of the things that I've been saying around this is that for Asian Americans, the detailed groups that have been named make sense, because we have had decades, right, of having these check boxes, say on the census form. And so we've sort of been doing the testing and research in real time. So we sort of have a sense of, okay, is this working? Is this not? And so one of the things that I think will be important to engage in with all of us is to engage in the process and to make sure, if health issues are of concern, working with HHS and saying, like, hey, what do you plan to do? How are you going to comply with this? Have you thought about if there are other groups that you'd like for them to to capture the data on, have you considered doing this? And then, helping them, if you can convince them that there should be some other set of categories to be used to help them develop the justification and the information that they need to be able to go that route.
Meeta?
Yeah, I'm actually going to fold in an answer to 3 different questions with this answer. So, I recognize how much time we have. So, I think it's important to uplift something Terry just said, right? Which is like, for years, we were all saying, remember that OMB standards are the minimum, not the maximum. You can always go beyond what they're saying. And guess what? That still remains true. So you can still advocate within agencies to try to get details on specific subpopulations that you are interested in having the detailed data on. And I think the ACS is a great starting point to understand, like, what is your specific geographic community, who comprises it, and to start looking for those health disparities. And I think, like, ACS is a rich form in trying to understand the underlying demographics of an area. Working with HHS is huge. And I do think, and this is how I'm tying it into Roz's answer, there is going to be an effort to suppress race and ethnicity data collection because it falls into a power narrative and a fear-mongering narrative. And I think one way we know to combat that is to point out that these health disparities that we can identify are real. You cannot deny them. You cannot deny that different communities have different lived experiences and different health outcomes, different educational outcomes, different investments in their communities. And we need to continue to be able to do that. That is not engaging in identity politics. That is engaging in understanding our communities. And in order to do that, we all need to continue to advocate for which communities we want to see counted and why. There was a third thing I was going to try to, and so there was a question on how do we advocate at state levels. We do have a data disaggregation action network that is working specifically in helping local and state advocates work within their states to try to achieve getting a MENA category or increased disaggregation. I will put that in the response as to how to sign up for that. We also had a recent report that details where the various states are in terms of these issues.
Thank you so much. Let's go into the speed round of answers now because I want to give you all a time to give us next steps. One of the questions says, I know I'm going to be asked, but because so many will likely write in something as their own box is not an option, how can I assure folks that the write-ins are truly counted? What should I say when encountering folks to write in and they don't want that to be wasted? So to be clear, you absolutely should write in the way that you identify. That is, in fact, how we would get the accurate count. And related to Rhonda's question, how will a pan-ethnicity such as Arab be tabulated when combination with a national identity such as, say, Palestinian? So our instructions going into 2030 with the MENA category, instead of check some other race, we're saying check the MENA checkbox, and then within that, you write in the way that you identify. For us, we're going specifically to actually say, write in Palestinian, write in Lebanese, write in Yemeni, write in Egyptian, so that from those individual categories, we would then be able to get to the aggregate of Arab. And that part is sort of critical for the very conversation that Terry and Meeta just had with regards to potential health disparities. We need to be able to know that based on that. Let me have Terry answer this one. I know the MENA category is not perfect, but will adjustments only come in the 10-year review, or did I misunderstand that?
So it will definitely come in a 10-year review, but there are opportunities for it to happen before that. I will note there are two things. One, there is OMB sort of leaves open that opportunity for them to revisit these standards prior to that 10-year mark, but there will definitely be a review in 10 years. And the other thing is, if you look at the notice, there is some language around exemptions. And as one of the exemptions, if the detailed groups used in the American Community Survey form changes, whatever those changes may be, will be one that can be utilized by any agency without having to go through the formal exemption process. So I would say that those are opportunities to revisit that can occur prior to that 10-year mark.
Thank you so much, Terry. Janan has a question regarding conversations around Persian identities. And I would share with you, Janan, that the Iranian American community has been a central part of both the Ancestry Working Group and the MENA Advocacy Network. Iranian Americans would be included within and are included within the MENA category, and is a pretty sizable, even though Arab Americans are the single largest segment. Next in line would be the Iranian American community. So that work would be underway with that community as well. We have a question from Sama with CBS Chicago. Our team has done a lot of reporting on the importance of MENA category for our local communities to be counted. Do you have any insight on if a subcategory of Palestinian is being considered to add to the forms, and what would it take to get it there? Apologies if this is already addressed. So thank you for asking that question. As if has not been made clear. We feel pretty strongly that the importance of getting the subpopulation checkboxes and writing questions right is critical to an accurate count. As I keep saying, we can't go from being rendered invisible to yet chronically undercounted. So the importance of addressing that is absolutely critical. And we definitely want to make sure that as we engage, including with the interagency working group that's being created to implement the race and ethnicity standards, that they understand these concerns and that the Bureau is able to conduct the research and testing that's necessary. Finally, before I turn it over to my colleagues, super quick for next steps, Ronya is here saying she's thrilled about this and wants to make sure we'll be able to use these new categories as researchers working in diversity, equity, inclusion. And the answer is absolutely yes, because it is across the board in terms of its implementation. We just need to remain focused on the issue of the disaggregate level data so we can get it beyond just the overarching MENA category. Meeta, Roz, and Terry, close us out with what you believe are the most important next steps.
So I think you should sign up for our data disaggregation network. I did put a link in the answers. I'm sure it can go in a follow-up email. I think it's really important that we continue, and I'm sure my colleagues will say this, continue the efforts to engage with OMB on the Census Bureau and the Census Bureau as to what we want to see research, to stay on top of them, to ensure that we see proper implementation. But my call to people on this Zoom is, this is an opportunity to show to our communities how important these types of data are in their everyday lives. So it's also an incredibly important moment for community engagement. So I hope that all community organizers who are able to fold this into their work to really underscore that we need these data in order to properly represent and serve our communities.
Thank you, Meeta. Roz?
Yes. So first of all, building on what my colleagues have said, first of all, it's critical that when the interagency committee does its research or starts to do its research, that Latinos, Afro-Latinos, researchers from the MENA community, researchers from and experts from the Afro community are at the table. So our next steps is to make sure that when that research is done, the right folks are at the table, because when Terry mentioned, gee, there's a possibility of the American Community Survey using categories that we might like better, we need to know what those checkboxes and examples should be. So that's one next step. Again, agree about the advocacy with regard to implementation and tabulation and all of that, but I would also ask all of you, because you're asking great questions, everybody that we're seeing here, you start thinking about what it's going to look like to educate your community members about this in the lead up to Census 2030. What questions are you going to need to answer for community members? How are you going to incorporate this in emphasizing the importance of filling out the census form? By the way, I'm going to do a little plug for August, being American Community Survey. Is it Awareness Month, right? But that's going to be an opportunity then to say, hey, by the way, the American Community Survey is using, may not be ready for prime time yet, but let's just start answering and let's start thinking about the questions community members are going to ask and how we're going to answer them and then integrate them into our outreach.
Thank you so much, Roz. Terry, close us out.
All right, and so where I agree with everything my colleagues have said, the other thing I will just reiterate, to the extent these agencies are developing their action plans, this is a time that we can weigh in and try to help influence what and how they approach this, rather than trying to fix it or clean it up on the back end. So this is our opportunity, but we will have to be proactive. We will have to proactively reach out, identify the agencies of interest and importance, triage. I know everybody has limited bandwidth. The ones perhaps work in coalition and divide and conquer, and really trying to think through how we can help these different agencies think about the best way to do this, especially to Meeta's point about this being a floor and not a ceiling, and really encouraging these agencies to do as much as they can to make sure that our communities are properly represented.
Thank Thank you so much, Terry. I want to thank all my colleagues for the incredible work that they are doing behind the scenes in front of the Bureau, in front of the agencies, in front of OMB, and organizing across the in our directly impacted communities to make sure that we are working now. I don't know which one said it. 6 years away is not that far away, but more importantly, the remedies for the very issues that we've raised today are happening now. The interagency working group is being pulled together in the next couple of months. The opportunity to weigh in on the American Community Survey is ongoing, and it is a great deal of important work that needs to be done. So for you all folks, thanks for self-selecting in. The website I would refer you to is the YallaCountMENA.org website. That is where we provide updates on these issues. That is where we will keep you informed on how you can best participate in the process, and that includes sort of weighing in with your member of Congress at the appropriate time to suggest that the research and testing needs to take place, weighing in with the Bureau officials on what should happen with, say, a new category, incredible development, but we need to make sure that there's subject area experts, MENA subject area experts within the Bureau, so that as when we talk about implementing this category, that we're able to put it in place correctly. So with that, I say thank you to everyone who joined us today, and we're going to just keep plugging away at this. Thanks, everybody. Take care.